Welcome to our podcast, Chat with Junko and Bola. My name is Junko Yoshida, Editor-in-Chief of the Ojo Yoshida Report. In each episode, we invite a subject matter expert for conversation. We ask probing questions to provide our listeners insight and clarity on the news of the moment.
As a public policy choice, you can either have a big regulatory stick up front, or you could have in the U.S., which is regulators use a much lighter touch, and then the threat of big lawsuits puts pressure on companies. Tort law puts pressure on companies to behave well. You can either have regulation or you can have big lawsuits. But if you have neither, then there's no checks and balances.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for the chat with Junko and Bola. And today we have special guest, Phil Koopman, the safety expert and professor at Carnegie Mellon University. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Junko. Hi, Bola. Great to be here.
Phil. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to have you.
All right. So this is coming towards the end of 2023, and so much happened this year, especially in the areas of automotive. I'm talking about automated features in ADAS, also totally automated robotaxi. And I think the news covered a lot of things in this area, but today we want to just do a brief recap of what happened 2023 and who failed what sort of things. So let's start with this the robotaxi area. Phil, so what did you see in 2023? What happened?
We saw peak robotaxi hype in the summer of 2023 in San Francisco. Now there may be another peak to come, but for sure, that summer was peak robotaxi hype. And I would say the one event that made it the hypiest of hype was that full-page New York Times ad where Cruise said, people are killing everyone else on the highway and our robotaxis are not going to do that. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the unmistakable takeaway from that ad.
Yeah. That was a total mistake on their part.
It turns out to have been a mistake. Yeah, but it's interesting why it was a mistake. I think the dynamic it set up was that this was already in place, but it really cemented the dynamic that any small mistake made by a robotaxi was news. But if it wasn't news before then, it was news now, because they had in effect promised our robotaxis won't make all those same stupid human driver mistakes. Human drivers are terrible because they're stupid, they're bad drivers. Ours won't be stupid, bad drivers. And so now it became fair game for any photo or video of any robotaxi doing anything stupid to now completely disprove the hypothesis behind that ad. And they didn't need to go there. That was not a smart way to sell the benefits of the technology. It just set them up for ridicule. And that promptly started happening.
Did they learn that lesson though?
Did they learn the lesson? I don't know. We're going to find out who learned what lesson.
Yeah. Because you call it a hype. So I'm thinking, is anybody going to beat that hype in the year ahead?
Well, we still hear other companies selling, we're busy saving lives. So that message hasn't changed that much. The other companies are still warming over similar messages. There was a letter, which I don't think got published, but there was a letter from the industry to the government saying, to DOT saying, hey, you have to intervene to save the robotaxi industry because we're busy saving lives. I don't see any remorse from the rest of the industry about having picked that hypey message. I mean, yeah, they're quieted down a little bit, but I don't see them changing direction.
No, that's true. It's we really, that's an interesting point, though. We haven't really heard the peep from other robotaxi companies about what happened 2023. It's almost like they want to isolate. This was an isolated incident with Cruise. When it comes to autopilot, it's an isolated incident with Tesla. We are different. Isn't it how they are framing it?
Well, that playbook has worked since the Uber ATG fatality. back in 2018, it's like the industry stance was, oh, it's of course it was those guys, right? And they're trying to do that with Cruise and Tesla. It's like, well, everyone knows that they were fast and loose. They're not saying that, but that's the vibe I get from how this is being treated. They're trying to say we're different. I mean, Waymo in particular has had a vocal, not particularly in your face, but if you're paying attention, a pretty vocal, but we're trustworthy, we're different.
Yeah.
And therefore not actually said we're different than Cruise, right? So that's what's been going on. But the reality is the entire industry has been playing from the same playbook. The public relations and government relations people from all the companies and the industry associations have all been singing the same tune. And maybe Cruise is singing it louder than everyone else, but everyone has been singing the same tune. Yeah. And I have not seen a sign of that changing.
Yeah.
Still looking back at 2023, you put two companies side by side. You juxtapose GM Cruise and Tesla. In the case of GM Cruise, something happened, and they were forced to taking certain decisions. In the case of Tesla, a lot of things also happen. We don't see and we don't hear of any major changes at Tesla. Nobody's saying anything. Nobody's lost their heads at Tesla.
Well, there's been a lot of turnover at Tesla, but it's not quite the same, right? I think the difference is Tesla has succeeded at blaming the human driver for the effects of technical shortcomings. Now, did I say the technology is the only factor? I didn't say that. But if you put an ordinary person into a highly automated vehicle and tell them pay attention and correct for any technical malfunctions, you're going to get bad outcomes if it's ill-behaved technology. And that's basically the mechanism we're seeing with Tesla. But we've already seen a couple court cases where the jury bought into, no, the driver was supposed to be paying attention. And whether that continues or not, we're going to see, right? But
there are a lot of court cases right now.
2024. You're going to ask me later about 2024. We're going to see a whole bunch of Tesla cases, and we're going to see which way the wind's blowing at the end of that.
Yeah.
Right? No. Whether juries buy into their narrative that I'll try and put it starkly, that if you have software that has defects that misbehaves, an untrained civilian driver is supposed to be able to mitigate the effects of those defects, which is much different than it's a well-behaved car and the driver knows exactly what they're supposed to do and they decided not to do it. That's different than the car, in some situations has been alleged to actively try and kill someone and you're supposed to stop it. That's way different than playing your well-defined role that is designed for a human to be able to easily can fulfill. Those are different things. And the distinction between those, between testing and being a supervisor of a reasonable car, those two things are getting conflated. And we have to tease those apart if we want to improve safety with that kind of technology.
That's true. That's who is responsible ultimately driving a certain vehicle is something that needs to be verified. Yeah.
And when the person's in charge, there's two scenarios. One is they're in charge of a production vehicle that is well behaved, and the other is they're in charge of a vehicle that's in test and has known defects and is trying to kill whatever, because the defects can predictably be expected to cause crashes, and somehow the human driver with no special training and no special credentials is supposed to stop that. That's just crazy. Okay. Yeah. But that's where we are with Tesla.
All right. I'm going to go back to the robotaxi issue now, because I think that is a good case that I think what played out in California is especially interesting in a way that at the end in October, California, this was CPUC said that, well, actually DMV said that, the Cruise will not be able to operate in California, right? But if we turn the clock back to several years ago, when DMV as well as CPUC actually enabled Cruise and Waymo to start driving without safety drivers and start charging people for giving that robotaxi service, there was no oversight by regulators whether it is safe to do that. I mean, there was no discussion, right, Phil?
Well, we have to be a little nuanced about this. There was a
Okay.
little bit of oversight, but the technical evaluation was thin, right? And the basis of the permits were not based on, we're going to evaluate the safety of your technology. The permits are primarily based on, did you test and not have crashes while you were testing? Okay, you're ready for the next level. And by the way, you have insurance and your test drivers have clean records and those kind of things. So it was not based on a robust evaluation of technology, which, by the way, was changing from week to week anyway, right? So it was moving. So yeah, and everywhere in the U.S., the federal government is hands off until after the crash. And the states are regulating, it varies by state, but they're regulating primarily by whether you have insurance and whether you've been seen to not have crashes on the road is what it boils down to.
Right.
Did the role of the government or regulatory bodies, did their role change in 2023 versus years ago? Did you notice anything that made you feel like, you know what, maybe you guys are now getting into your grooves. You're really knowing, you now know exactly what you need to do. Did that change in 2023?
What we saw in 2022 and 2023 was an industry campaign state by state to make it impossible for localities to do anything. So the regulations actually got more hands off over the last couple of years, which is why you see things like San Francisco cannot issue traffic tickets to robotaxis. And they're not allowed to prohibit robotaxis from operating near active school zones or anything. It's all at the state level. And then you see the state being extremely permissive. So San Francisco as a city is really frustrated because they don't have a say in any of this. And the state regulatory bodies have, I listened to, I think it was a 6-hour hearing. I listened to the whole thing for the PUC permissions. And there were lots of unhappy people, and PUC said, yeah, go for it, guys. It's no checks and balances. Just go for it.
Yeah, that was a public hearing that happened in August.
In August,
August,
yeah.
right?
And it only took a couple of weeks before this crash, before you had a fire truck crash. I mean, it didn't take long to find out that maybe that was overreaching on the decision.
Yeah, that's so. Let's talk about this regulation thing, because one of the things that I'm always curious about, because I come from Japan, and Japan is a country where they really expect public opinion. People really expect a lot of their government to protect them from any malpractices or any safety issues. That's very important to them. But when I moved to the United States more than a couple of decades ago, I was really surprised that generally speaking, there's part of the reason I was in Silicon Valley. So part of the very permissive that regulations stop innovation. That narrative was already prevalent 20, 30 years ago in the tech community, and it still continues. No?
Yeah, that's what they keep saying. And there are a couple of things that play there. One is it depends what kind of regulation.
Right.
And if you have a regulatory backlash after excesses, yes, that in fact can stifle an industry. We saw that happen with the rail companies 100 years ago. So yes, but that's usually after the backlash when they have to clamp down because of public outcry. Regulations that are a little more proactive, especially if the industry said, hey, regulation benefits all of us because there's a level playing field. Here's regulations that would not curtail it. You could regulate and not have and not curtail innovation. They could do that, but they choose not to. They choose instead to beat the drum of we want no regulation because it stifles innovation. So you repeat as loud as you can, as often as you can. And they usually win that battle, which is why they act this way. And then if there's excesses, the regulatory backlash comes and they complain about how onerous that is. But they have a choice. They can either get it together and behave well, or they can get regulatory backlash. And we're on a path for regulatory backlash eventually. If this keeps up, now you can say, well, there's a couple companies that are bad actors and all the rest of them are perfect actors. But at some point, if there are enough bad actors, or if there's the one bad enough event, that narrative runs out of steam, and we're at a point where it's starting to run out of steam. It's unclear which way that's going to go. Maybe they get another bite at the apple, but it's unclear how that's going to go.
Right. All right.
That's at the national level in the United States. Any difference in other parts of the world?
Well, in Europe and pretty much everywhere else, they have type approval where a car goes on the road. It has to be approved for safety before it goes on the road. Whereas in the U.S., the manufacturers say, yeah, we think it meets the applicable regulations. We self-certify to the regulations, which have nothing to do with software. They just have to do with the headlights and the airbags, and which is great. I'm glad we have those things. But there are no U.S. federal regulations for anything about computer driving. And so they just put it on the road, and the U.S. regulators wait for the crashes. And if there's a pattern of bad things, they pressure for a recall.
Yeah. All right.
But there's a reason why those are just different systems. The thing we have that Europe doesn't have is a much more heavyweight liability system. So you have a choice. As a matter of public policy, I'm an engineer, but I'll talk about this. So I'll talk about this briefly. But as a public policy choice, you can either have a big regulatory stick up front, and then you can say our liability laws don't permit a lot of collection. Why? Because the regulators are supposed to prevent the bad things from happening. Or you could have in the U.S., which the regulators use a much lighter touch, and then the threat of big lawsuits puts pressure on companies. Tort law puts pressure on companies to behave well. But what's the problem? Then you hear companies complaining about how big the judgments are. But in fact, that was the only thing providing deterrence for bad behavior. So it's not a defect in our system. It's a feature of a system. You can either have regulation or you can have big lawsuits. But if you have neither, then there's no checks and balances.
And it's really hard to actually, if it is hardware, if there's defect, it's obvious. I mean, it's in every chip or everything. But it's like when it's software, it cannot. A lot of times you can't make it repeat. No.
Well, it's only a little true.
Oh, okay.
So if you have hardware that has redundancy and redundancy management, and there's a defect in the redundancy management, the hardware has to fail to notice that went wrong. Right. And so that tends to be a random field event that is also difficult to reproduce.
That's true. Yeah.
So are you saying it's not possible to build redundancies into software?
Oh, it's harder. It's different. So for hardware and software, if you have a repeatable defect, but it only happens once in a while, you can use some probability math on it. So if you have like a chip that there's a bit flip from a cosmic ray, or there's a transistor burns out or something like that. Okay, if you have two of them, the cosmic ray won't hit both chips. All right. But if there's a design defect in the hardware, remember the floating point bug from Intel? If you have a design defect in hardware, or you have a design defect in software, then both copies will have the same problem. And so traditionally, hardware didn't have a lot of logic errors because it just wasn't that complicated. But now that use VHDL and Verilog to write hardware, it has bugs just like software.
Okay. Yeah.
So it isn't. So people don't typically talk about hardware versus software defects now. They talk about systematic defects versus random defects.
Right.
And systematic defects are the design defects, which could be either hardware or software, but software is more known for it.
Yeah. Well, let's connect that discussion of the system defects, or that it's really hard to figure out. I mean, that was part of the cover for the NHTSA, the federal agency, to say that, well, we could do the oversight of the autonomous vehicle industry, but it is really hard. I mean, isn't that the kind of the excuse that they gave us?
It's hard to do it the way they have in the past.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So how would we do it differently then?
Okay. Are we back to recording now?
Yeah.
Oh, we are recording. Don't worry.
We're back to real discussion. Okay. Okay. Ask the question again, Chica.
Okay. So we were talking about the system defects and how hard it is to really pinpoint where the failure happened. Software, hardware, is it repeatable? I mean, there's a lot of elements involved in finding what went wrong. And that was part of the reason that NHTSA, for example, the federal safety agency, is talking about it is difficult to do the oversight on the autonomous vehicle industry because it is difficult for the regulators to find out, what went wrong. Was not the cover that they gave to the reason why they haven't really regulated autonomous vehicle? No.
Well, it's sort of complicated, but there's a lot of history here.
Okay.
NHTSA has traditionally used tests. Reproducible vehicle level tests is the only set of regulation. And the car industry wants to keep them in that box as much as they can, right? So the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, FMVSS, are all repeatable, objective, measurable tests, like on a test track or something, okay? And the problem you have with that is that that's never been a good way to assure software safety. Testing doesn't get you software safety. It may work for mechanical systems and some other things, but there are just too many ways software can fail in an infrequent, rare basis, but frequently enough to be a problem that you're just not going to see in testing. And so testing in the software world doesn't prove safety. It's a check and balance that the engineering process was carried out rigorously. And in all the different engineering domains, the way you get safety is not by testing. You get it by using a safety standard, by using engineering rigor. Okay. And so the thing is, with engineering rigor, you can't really test that in. So you have to have the safety standards. And all the other industries follow their safety standards. And the car companies don't. And so until NHTSA says we're going to pivot from regulating based on vehicle level tests to making sure the industry follows its own industry consensus safety standards, they're going to be stuck. They're not going to have an effective leverage on this technology because testing just doesn't get you there.
I see. So there are a couple of things that NHTSA actually can do in terms of not repeating what they used to do, but updating how they do the oversight of the autonomous vehicle industry. What are the things you would suggest, Phil?
Well, the number one thing is that they have an advance notice of proposed rulemaking from 2020, which is the previous administration. So it's even the other party proposed this, that says, hey, why don't we just make the self-driving car industry follow its own safety standards and use that as a basis for regulation. So that proposed rulemaking was put out, advance notice was put out, and hundreds of comments were produced by the public. A lot of them had to do with some bicycle activism, but there were still a lot of comments, really substantive comments. I put in some, lots of people put in some. And those comments and that proposal have been sitting there since 2021 and nothing's happened. So they talk about, we need a framework. They have a framework. They just have to do something with it. And it's based on standards like all the other industries use. So I don't care which party created it. It's how everyone else does safety. Why doesn't the auto industry get with the program and do it the same as aviation and chemical process and rail and all these other folks?
When you look back at 2023 again, so let's take what you're just talking about now. And I want to ask you, what kind of impact did 2023 actually have on safety regulations, whether it's in the part of the industry itself or on NHTSA? Did it actually move anything in any specific direction, or are we still trying to make sense of the mess?
Well, we saw NHTSA trying to, at the federal level, move forward with recalls that are a little broader than we had seen before. Because in the past, recalls had been this one component or this one particular narrow thing has a safety problem. And we saw them try and widen that a little bit to, you're having there's an investigation about dangerous interactions with pedestrians, which is a lot broader than we've seen before. But that's still not net safety. It's still a particular aspect of safety, like the problems with crashes with emergency responders. That's still years later under investigation for Tesla. So we've seen them launch these, but we haven't really seen a lot of conclusions that we don't know how those are going to turn out. So that's happened, but it's not a shift. It's a little more active, but it's not a shift in approach other than broadening scope, generally scope. From the states, we finally found out what it takes for California DMV to take away a permit. And we kind of knew that because one of the other companies had their permit revoked for a crash, a non-injury crash, and then later had their permit revoked for having drivers that didn't have clean driver records like they were supposed to. And for Cruise, we saw the permit reduced in scope after the crash of the fire truck and then taken away after the pedestrian dragging incident. So we've seen California DMV take away permits, but we haven't seen a change in the regulatory approach. We haven't seen that. Right now, it's still status quo. Now, what we saw in other industries in the decades past is that it takes something really big and really tragic to force a change in regulations. I mean, that's why we have NTSB. There was a plane crash. We have NHTSA because of the book and the the Ralph Nader book and some other things, right? All these agencies come about because of the bad thing. And we haven't had the bad enough thing to either force NHTSA to change its tactics or to have a new federal agency for automation. I don't know which way it's going to go. But we're not there yet. We're still waiting to see how this turns out. In 2024, you can't predict when that bad thing will happen that causes the pivot. Maybe the industry will ask for it, but I don't see it happening.
That's a real problem. It's sort of like we're waiting for something really bad to happen so that we can change the way the status quo. One of the things,
it's super frustrating. It's super frustrating for someone like me to acknowledge that that's really the way it always works, right?
Yeah.
That's, you can advocate for safety, you can tell people what they should be doing, but until a bad thing happens, if you criticize this stuff when there's a bandwagon, you're a Luddite. And then if you criticize it after the bad thing, then you're piling on, right? There's no way to win this conversation.
Well, one of the things that actually I'm going to be a little bit, away from what we're talking about, but what I noticed in 2023, a lot of people start talking about, well, we need to build safeguards, the guardrails to the machine learning, artificial intelligence, or anything else, right? I mean, this guardrail things became really popular. But even if somebody says, or the industry says that we have guardrails, if they are not enforcing it, I mean, if there's no regulators say, well, you said you have guardrails, but you're not actually using it. I mean, that's where regulations have to come in, no?
Well, you either have to have regulatory oversight or you have to have a court system with teeth. Take your pick. The U.S. tradition is the court system with teeth, not the regulators, right? But what we've seen with these state laws is they've pulled all the teeth out of the tort system as well, so that means you don't have either leg. One of the things I advocated with my co-author Bill Wyden was to have a duty of care for any computer that's steering a vehicle down the road on a sustained basis. Because that brings into effect existing state tort laws as if it's a human driver. It should be no different than a human driver. If a computer kills someone, it should be the same as a human does. And there are situations that are excusable. There's situations that aren't. But at least then there's accountability as opposed to the way it is now, where it's unclear if a computer driver kills someone, either the nearest convenient human gets blamed or there's one state where, near as I can tell, you take the computer out of the car and you throw the computer in a jail cell. That doesn't really accomplish anything. Right now it's a mess. If that gets cleaned up, that might put enough pressure on the companies financially to reduce the need for the really aggressive regulation. So there's multiple ways to address this. We can't just sit here and do none of the ways. We have to do something.
It just seems to me that it comes down right back to the waiting game.
Yeah, sadly. So, 2023 was peak hype, and we were waiting, and we saw how that turned out. 2024, we're going to see whether or not the industry doubles down on their previous game. Well, they wait for the dust to settle and then go back to business as usual, or whether they truly pivot hard into more responsible safety practices. We'll see. And I'm talking about as an industry, there's different companies who do different things. Right. But when you have the industry all doing the same propaganda that enables the bad actors, you're going to get bad outcomes from somebody. That's just the way that is. So do they really change and go more into not just say we're saving lives, so forget all the messes near term, but actually a public stakeholder value proposition that is more than just rhetorical, someday we'll save lives. They can go that way. Will they? Don't know. And for the driver assistance systems, so-called, it's actually not ADAS. That's a whole different discussion. ADAS is only level 1. It's not level 2. But everyone succeeded in branding it that way, so that's not a fight I'm going to win. But if you have the automated driving where there's a human driver that's there to take the fall when something bad happens, we can see some of the companies, I hope, are going to go down the path of making sure that, no, really, an ordinary person really will have good safety outcomes from this because they've taken the care on the driver monitoring and the operational concept. And we have other companies that clearly are not going down that path. And I would love to see that resolved in 2024, but I'm not holding my breath. I think we're going to have to see something much more dramatic to rein in that mess right now. We haven't seen it yet.
It is amazing, actually, that you said the other company, but I think you mean Tesla. But
Tesla is the king of that.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
there's all sorts of companies deploying all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And they don't have enough vehicles for us to know how it's turning out, right? There's other cars which mostly go with steering wheel torque for paying attention. And over time, they're going to want to improve the behavior of those systems. And at some point, they're going to hit a place where people start dropping out. And if they don't have camera-based driver monitoring and maybe more, who knows, they're going to be right where Tesla is. It's just Tesla was there first at scale, so they make the news.
Right.
But there's lots of pressure for the other car companies to copy their playbook. If Tesla's making gobs of money and you're CEO of another company and you don't follow the playbook of the company that's eating your lunch and try and catch up, you're going to get some pressure, right? So it's not just a Tesla issue; it's an industry issue.
Interesting. Yeah, that is very true. And it's almost like, again, 2024, we were talking about the bad outcome to happen, but it's like we're going to see that if Tesla's any of the lawsuits, how would they turn out? That also has a huge impact for the auto industry in 2024. Yeah.
And let me connect it out to 2024, because what we're going to see is the so-called level 3 systems. Those are going to they're supposed to be coming out this month, but we're going to see them almost for sure in 2024. And I know, Junko, you've done some reporting.
Right.
We had discussions about this, and it's going to be more than one company now. Apparently, Mercedes has already announced, but BMW has one announced, and there'll be pressure for everyone else to join the bandwagon.
Right.
And they're saying, well, it's okay to play video games and watch movies, but if there's a crash, we're not really going to stand behind you. We're just going to a little bit stand behind you. And if the court system ends up blaming the drivers for these crashes, those companies have no reason to change their posture. Do whatever you want, but it's your fault if there's a crash. And we may see more of that. There's a good reason to believe we're going to see a lot of that in 2024.
Wow,
that's stunning. But I just want to kind of just take a step back, if you don't mind, into 2023 again. This time on the ADAS side, I want you to just tell us, what were your highlights for ADAS in 2023? What were those key things that you saw and that you're then going to be addressing in future?
Well, the big thing we saw, there's a lot of technical progress, a lot of interesting stuff, cool stuff, and I'm not going to try and go down the list of the ADAS achievements, but the big one was the emergence of the level 3 I was just talking about. And saying we're going to make it so the driver does not have to pay attention to the road, and the continued ambiguity as to whether they really mean that or not. Because they'll say in one place you don't have to watch the road, then they'll say in another place you're supposed to notice if something's wrong. If there's a bad driving situation, well, how do you notice a bad driving situation if you're watching a movie? I don't get that. And so I think in 2023, what we saw was people realizing that cognitive dissonance was not going away. That every time everyone said, oh, it must be just a misunderstanding. And then every time you asked the manufacturer, they double down even harder on, no, they really meant it to not make sense. from a common sense point of view. It's like, you don't have to watch the road, but it's still your fault. And it's pretty clear that's where they're coming down on it. So in 2023, that to me, that was the biggest trend. And the question for 2024 is whether they keep pushing on that.
Yeah, that's true. But also, companies can actually revert back, even though they pile on more automated features and sell that as a marketing device and talk consumers into, well, but this is a level 2 cars or level 1 car. I mean, it's like there's the sort of bait and switch. It is more automated, but hey, you're more responsible.
So that's more of the classic problem that people have worried about, which is that when you have a driver who's told they're in charge, but you give them nothing to do, they're going to drop out.
Yeah.
They're going to have automation complacency. That's inevitable. This has been said for years. Missy Cummings in particular has been saying this for years. There's just no question that's going to happen. And so you have two problems. One is telling drivers, so you have the autonomous washing problem. Excuse me. So you have the autonomous washing problem, which is selling it as a high level when it's really not.
Yeah.
But you also have the driver automation complacency problem, which is you undersell the level and then give it all the attributes of something that's a robo-taxi, but tell the driver they still have to stay in charge, and they're not going to, because that's human nature.
Wow. I mean, sorry, Bill. This happened at the tail end of 2023. China came out and addressed some of these things that you're talking about. They're insisting that somebody has to be in the vehicle. But what you're saying implies that that person may also not be paying as much attention.
Well, there's a couple things there. So the recent China announcements, they say someone has to be in the vehicle, but they're telegraphing pretty strongly their path forward is remote monitoring. Okay.
Wow.
And so they've already given permission for cities to allow remote monitoring. And I know that's already been happening in some of the cities in China.
Yeah.
All right. So whenever you see a China robotaxi, apparently there's been signs and if you pay attention, it feels this way, but now we have a little bit more written proof that what's going on is every single China robotaxi apparently has a remote driver, full-time, paying attention. Not someone who just, the car calls them for help and they give help, but like a full-time remote person with a steering wheel, and a brake pedal. All right. And they're not driving all the time. It's not remote operated, but they're basically a safety driver. They're there waiting to jump in as soon as needed. And it's a one-to-one relationship, the full-time driver the whole time. And if you're just trying to get the human driver out of the robotaxi and your technology is not ready, there are for sure some issues with control system lag and cell phone coverage dropout. But if you have 5G and you're careful about which streets, which both are true in China, in the areas they're operating, maybe it's okay. I would want to see more data before I pass judgment on that. But they're going continuous remote operator, which the US is trying not to do. So when you say they're ahead on robotaxis, well, that's not many people's definition of ahead, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now to address your thing about will they drop out? Well, these are theoretically professionally trained drivers. They're under supervision. They should be taking rest breaks. They should have rotations. They have supervision. One hopes that they have periodic tests. Sounds like airline pilot to me.
Yeah.
It's a lot different than a retail customer with no special training, no supervision, no monitoring, right? And so that's the difference here. You can argue that a professional safety driver provides a higher level capability. They also have capabilities, but if you've characterized and monitored how often they need to change out and things like this, arguably can make this work.
Oh.
All right. Yeah, well, I just want to close that.
Sounds expensive, though, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It is expensive, and it makes me wonder why bother doing it. I mean, if you might as well just leave the driver in place.
They're going to say it's a stepping stone, and sure, I mean, it could be a stepping stone. That's a rational way to proceed, but they're not 10 feet tall. That's where they are.
Yeah.
Okay, I suspect that Junko is about to close, so I got to ask you, what is your vision for 2024? What are you seeing ahead? You mentioned during our pre-discussion that you like to kind of split it into two. So what do you see on the ADAS side? What do you see on the AV side?
for the driving automation side with a human driver still involved, I see a real push to level 2+++, which is what I called it a year ago. Which is they want everyone to think it's level 3, meaning that you don't have to pay attention, but you do have to pay attention.
Yes.
And 2024, I think, is the year where we find out whether that gets traction or they have to back off from it and really say either you're driving or you're not, right? And we're going to see how long they can stretch that out, because that buys time to scale up. So that's 2024 on that. For robotaxis and don't forget, robo-trucks are supposed to all be on the road in the next 18 months or something.
Right.
That's right. Those are coming too. The question is going to be whether the robotaxi industry pivots into safety for real, or they continue with the same playbook. And if they continue the same playbook, eventually there'll be the next bad crash, and they won't have the trust for the reasons they didn't have the trust after the summer of hype. That's probably a bad outcome for them, but we'll see. Or maybe they pivot harder into real safety and change their messaging from "we're saving lives" to "here are the values we can provide with you near term. Here's real stuff we can do for you right now, and we promise to be responsible road citizens and do the right thing for safety." Rather than saying we're saving lives and then every crash just undermines their narrative. So I think they really need a narrative shift to survive this, and that's going to be true for both trucks and robotaxis.
Yeah. All right, very good. I think this sort of sums up our podcast on this. But actually, I do have last question. You did mention, Phil, that NHTSA already have a framework for AV that was proposed in 2021, right? And it's sitting there. And but they also talk about I think the point that I wanted to make was the duty of care. I mean, can we actually put that into some kind of guideline or regulations in the AV industry? I wonder if those two are the things that you hope that would happen in 2024.
No, my number one wish is duty of care. And that can just be a simple statement from the federal government saying, hey, states, you should consider a computer driver to have the same duty of care as a human driver. All tort laws apply, in a discussion. That doesn't fix safety, but you were talking earlier, Junko, about guardrails.
Yeah.
It puts some really nice guardrails in place. It puts financial imperative in place to be more responsible, to do the right thing. And the companies that are already doing the right thing shouldn't have a problem with this.
Right.
Because they're already doing the right thing, right? Yeah. So I think that's the number one thing. And the number two thing is to advance the framework that says you have to follow your own standards. Now, if people don't like that, let's have the discussion. But let's not just put it on ice while everyone's whining that there's no framework. We have a framework. If you don't like it, well, dive in and let's have the discussion about how to fix it. But don't say there's no framework and there's nothing we can do and the feds aren't doing anything. The feds try to do something, and obviously something stopped that from continuing, right?
Right.
So the problem isn't the lack of NHTSA trying to come up with a framework. It's more complicated than that.
All right, very good. That ends our discussion. We're really looking forward to 2024, and we expect the Phil to lead us to the more of the discussion 2024. Thanks for coming to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. Have a great 2024, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Phil. Your wish list, I find it very interesting, but let's see how it unfolds in 2024.
Well, I mean, I want a punny, but I'm not getting that, so I'm going to wish for the other things.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to our latest chat with Junko and Bola. Register at www.ojoyoshidareport.com and you will have free access for your first 2 months to in-depth news and analysis that you can't find anywhere else.